I want to welcome everyone to the Succinct seminar. We're pleased you're joining. As the seminars are given, you can feel free, if you wish, to post questions that could be addressed at the end of each talk. So I am pleased to begin with Yoon Ah Shin. She has an interesting background, 2 degrees in public administration. She completed those, her BA and her MA, and related to public policy in Ewha Women's University in the Republic of Korea. She did her PhD. She came to the US and went to University of Pittsburgh, where she got a degree in public and international affairs. And really interesting work on the Ebola crisis in Liberia that occurred in 2014, really looking at essentially the response and the coordination of resource management networks and how that impacted research operation or field operations in international global health. She's very well published, particularly focused on collective action, crisis management, and she's currently working on a project with a succinct pursuit team that includes Brian Beckich, the leaders, and Catherine Lacasse. And she may tell us a little bit about that. So Yoon Ah, it's a pleasure to let you begin your talk.
Hi, thank you for inviting for this talk. And I'm really happy to join this talk to share my research with you all. So my research is to investigate the risk perception of political leadership toward the climate change risk. So as we experience, the climate change risk is very in front of us. We are really experiencing critical issue in our human system. But to solve this climate change risk, we really need to understand then how the natural and human system interact one another to increase or decrease the climate change risk. So to support the economic development, heavy industrial activities increase the carbon emission, and it causes the temperature rising. And because of that, we experience lots of unprecedented extreme events. So now human system experience the decreasing of our well-being. So if the human system work very correctly, then in response to this extreme events, then we need to decrease the industrial behaviors or just decrease the carbon emission. But somehow something wrong happened in the human system. So this link hasn't been working very well. And we are still increasing carbon emission, and this causes climate change risk increasing. So now I faced the question then how much a researcher really understand the human system in an environmental study. So my team and I examine 222 articles published by the interdisciplinary teams, and those teams are supported by the NSF. And although all these teams aim to investigate interactions between the natural and human system to see any environmental issues. But unfortunately, almost half of the articles show only separate system, either natural system or human system. And only 37.8% of the articles show the one-way direction. So either natural interactions to human system or how the human system influences the natural system. And actually, there is a very little understanding about how human system influence the natural system. So in a climate change risk, there are 2 major tracks to understand human system. So one is the psychological approach. The psychological approach to investigate the personal risk perception about the climate change risk. So we have seen lots of survey data that the personal opinion about the urgency of the climate change risk. But the limitation is the personal opinion or personal behaviors doesn't change the human system that much. An economic approach is investigating the people's behaviors derived by the economic benefit benefit or economic interest. And this approach contributes to the developing carbon tax or renewable energy subsidy policies. But the major limitation of this approach is the analysis, the calculation doesn't account any other social factors or social uncertainties. But human system is not living in a vacuum. We are living in a very complicated institutional system. So in a current human system, the major cause of the climate change comes from the energy structure. And this energy structure includes the energy used in industry and transportation, and energy used in building and other residential energy use. And these energies are mostly produced by oil, coal, and gas. But fortunately, the renewable energy has been increasing to produce the energy, but somehow the coal and oil, which are the major cause to emit the greenhouse gas, actually, like these major proportion, it has been since like 1900, but this data only show from the 1965, but especially the for coal industry, it has been a major industry to produce energy since the industrial revolution. So what I want to say here is our energy system is not a matter of our behavior, personal choice of energy, but we are living in such a structure, social structure, and we are living in these social institutions. Then what is the social institutions? So the institutions is the rule or orders created by the human and the people. And we make an order, but the former institution include policy, our constitutions, regulation, or legislation, but also informal institutions include our culture or social norms. And all these institutions work together to stabilize our human system. So our human system is multi-layered institutional system, and also the human entities, all different entities in a human system, exploit our resources to maximize their own interest. And each entity has a different interest. For example, politicians, their goal is the re-election. Industry, they want to maximize their profit. Citizen, we want to increase our well-being. But all these interests compete each other through the collective action. And through this interaction, we develop the institution, and that institution structure the human system. But once institution is developed, it's really hard to get back to the condition which institution was not existing. Because once institutions occur, other institutions developed on the top of the existing institutions. Then we really need to understand the current social institutions between the politicians and industry to maximize their interest. This picture show that big oil gets an 11,900% return on every dollar it spends on Congress. Industry are the major supporter for the politicians' campaign. And once they got elected, then they need to return the benefit to that supporting industry. And this relation has been developing in the history. So recently, in 2018, the IMF suggested carbon tax $75 per ton, but actually in the current system, the carbon subsidy is between the 85 and 120. So there is no reason for carbon industry to change their structure because they still have more benefit through the subsidy. And this is the basic, this is the data from the 2011. And this show that the subsidy policy is really historically developed. So oil and gas, they get the subsidy more than $4 billion every year since 1918. And the renewable system, it is a very new born institutions, relatively speaking, and they have a very little portion. Well, but I can say that this is kind of like out of dated. So we need to see that what about the current situation? We hope that our current human system can be changed a lot since that point. This is the world trend of the subsidy structure. Fortunately, the renewable subsidy has been increasing until the 26% in the world, and it is much higher than the previous data. But however, we need to see that still 70% of the subsidy going to the fossil fuel industry. And well, of course, and then we really can see that this preeminence position is really rarely be changing over the decades. But economists, they suggested that if we reduce our subsidy for the fossil fuel industry to the 35% and then increase the subsidy for the renewable energy to the 41% by 2030. And then if we keep this trend until 2050, then we can restrict the global warming to 2 Celsius or less. But in a history, based on historical tracking, I don't really believe it will happen that soon in a human system. But I'm not here to be so pessimistic about our future. I'm not here to criticize all these analyses, but I'm here to suggest to new way that how we can change our human system. So I get back to my first slide. Now we have a more clarify our entities, industry, politicians, citizens. And now in this current system, their lobbying and subsidy have a really tight, their relationship is very tight. And through all this money, they are using lots of advertisement or media to distract the citizens. Of course, personally, citizens think that climate change risk itself is very important, but relatively to other important issues, we probably not really consider it is the top most important issue. And also, as I said, our energy structure is already developed. We have no choice. We just use it with unconscious mind. And we still support these industrial behaviors and politicians. So now we created such a vicious cycle. But now my research focus on these three entities. So if the citizens raise a voice in a right way, then how can we change our human system? So my research question is, to what extent do social institutional factors play a part in determining the risk perception of political leadership? I developed a system dynamic simulation model using the theory of planned behavior. So theory of planned behaviors talking that the people determine our behaviors based on 3 different factors. The first factor is perceived social norm. This means the perception about the particular behavior, which is influenced by the judgment of the significant others. So people consider how my parents, how my peer, how my teacher or neighbors think about my behaviors, and they decide their behavior. But politicians, they are not influenced by their family members' opinion or their neighbors' opinion about the policy. But the politician, they need to consider how about this policy in a history and for the last decades, because that is the priority over other agenda in a nation. And that is, they have a limited budget. They cannot change that much portion in to allocate the new budget reflecting to the previous policy trend. So their decision is bounded by the previous policies. And perceived behavioral control is perceived ease or difficulty of performing the particular behaviors. So if the carbon industry have a much lobbying behavior to politicians, then politicians feel more difficulties to control over the carbon industry. And general attitude toward the behavior, that means perception about other people's general attitude. So this here is this collective, citizens' collective action. As I said, personal opinion, there is no way to go to the politicians, but only when the citizen mobilize the collective action that influence politicians' decision, so such as legal petitions or street demonstration or signature campaign for certain issues. So this is my analysis model. The subsidy is developed through the history. But so this subsidy actually, it was the way to accumulate the carbon industry's wealth and then their power. But these carbon force can be decrease if there is a collective action, citizen collective action to oppose to their behaviors. And when the politician decide the renewable energy subsidy, then of course they are considering the renewable lobbying power, their renewable industrial lobbying power relative to the carbon first. And also, when the politicians decide a carbon subsidy policy, then they consider the carbon lobbying power, but relative to the renewable energy subsidy, because also this is the norm, the government norm historically developed. So they cannot ignore such a power in our institutions. And this is my formula. So I used the previous data about the subsidy proportion, the ratio in 2020, and then lobbying ratio, so amount of the lobbying, yes. And then when I found the 2018, their carbon lobbying amount is like 4 times higher than the renewable lobbying. So I set this matrix. And then there is a 2 different scenario that if the collective action is powerful as 2 or as powerful as 10. So this is my first result, that if the citizens' collective action is powerful as 2, then unfortunately renewable energy subsidy is very steady in the bottom line. But the carbon subsidy is keep increasing. However, if the citizens' power is as strong as 10, then while it is kind of promising that around like 50 years, carbon energy subsidy is overtake the carbon subsidy. But for me, it is quite not realistic. It is not realistic scenario because this citizen 10 power should be the double, is 2 times higher than the current carbon industrial lobbying power. So I set another analysis model. So if there is another collective action to increase the renewable energy subsidy, then how it can happen? Then now the citizens' collective action is going toward 2 different directions. When the citizens' power as 2 as before, but now is like 2 different collective action. Fortunately, renewable energy subsidy is going up, but the carbon subsidy also going up together. And then the slope of the carbon subsidy seems steeper than the renewable energy subsidy. However, if citizens' power is going up by 1, it is very interesting that renewable energy subsidy it is going to overtake within 15 years to overtake the carbon subsidy amount. So I believe this is very promising news for us, and it is really good way to direct how citizens' collective action should going toward for the climate change risk. So my conclusion is my research analysis show that citizens' collective action is a matter to change and to correct our human system. And now my research really contributes to adding a new perspective in a human system. And then ultimately, I will integrate this model with the carbon emission model and temperature change model so that if the collective action increase the their subsidy amount and how these subsidies can change their carbon emissions and the temperature changes. So that, yeah, we are aiming to finish our fully coupled model between the human and natural system. And then, but now my current challenge is finding the common metrics across the different factors. Well, as you see that the lobbying and all the subsidy can be measured as the amount of their money, but I couldn't find the metric for the collective action to interchange with other entities. So my future research is to see that what about the collective action, citizens' collective action as a consumers influencing to the industry directly. And then also my future research is going to be find a mechanism that how these citizens' collective action start up and how it spill over to involve the more general public. So my talk is until now here. So thank you for listening. And if you have any question and if you have any suggestion, advice, I'm really welcome to get all those, your comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yuna. That was really interesting. And we do have a few questions. We have time for about 3, so we'll address these. The first one is, what are the subsidies actually to the fossil fuel industry? Are they mainly things like taxpayers subsidizing the health costs of air pollution, or are there more direct subsidies than that?
Yes, actually, when I just started this study, I also very wondering what is the subsidy for the tax subsidy for the carbon industry, but actually it was so most of the part is the government support the money for the paying the cost of the oil. So extraction of oil is more expensive than the cost we pay for the electricity or our energy consumption. So it is a very historical background. So because the government wanted to boost the industry, so they really pay for the subsidy that for the users to use the energy sources with a cheaper price so that they can utilize more industrial behaviors, and it is very historically developed, and then many parts already embedded in our living, our taxpayer or our cost. And also it is embedded in a trading system, embedded in the laboring system. So it is really historically developed subsidy policy. And also recently many people say that our current cost doesn't include the social externalities such as air pollution and our health influences. So all those social externalities was not calculated in an exact way. That's why we just assume that our cost doesn't really include all those factors to cover that cost. So that is the direct and indirect the subsidy.
That's great. Thank you. The next question, and I'm going to add something to this, is Ryan Unks wants to know about the metric of collective action. Could you talk more about that and how you assess that potentially? I also wanted to ask if you could talk to us about what might motivate collective action. In other words, what are the drivers of that?
Yes. So yeah, as I said in my conclusion, my current challenging is to find a metric for the collective actions, because I don't know, like so far I think that we cannot really measure the value of collective action as the amount of the money. So I was thinking that, well, it could be probably can be calculated with the economic approach, the how much money people willing to pay to attend the collective action, like in that way. But I couldn't find such a research so far. So that's why I'm kind of open this question to everyone to give me any suggestion or advice for the proper metric. But now I'm thinking that maybe the number of people's petition or number of their signature campaign which changed the legislation, so that I can kind of measure the relative power of the individual tendencies. And and then the motivation of the people who joining the collective action, it should start from the like personal opinion, of course, but we really need someone who have a central role to gather people. And now in this current society, lots of environmental NGOs, they play as a like public issue to gather people. So we see lots of posting by the NGOs or international organizations saying that, oh, this time we are gathering together, we are doing a like such a demonstration, so please participate in or like check this date. So all those like social mobilization is the way to encourage people to join this collective action. But as I said in my conclusion, that is my following research as well. Yes.
Yeah, and as I recall in the past work by this group, they suggested that attribution theory may help with motivating people. That is, the more closely they can relate their own personal problems to climate change. And I thought that was an interesting result. Okay, you had a couple more questions, but we're out of time. You will get a transcription of the questions, and you can communicate with these people individually.
Yes.
So Rachel M. and Keenan will make sure that that Yoon Ah has a chance to correspond with you. Thank you so much for your talk.
Thank you for inviting.